Hello and welcome everyone to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. I am your host, Nina Joshi. I would like to formally bring on our guest for today, Kelly Cheng, who is a leader in our US digital health strategy at Samsung. Thanks so much for being here.
Nina, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So excited to dive in and learn more about you and all of the amazing work that you're currently doing. I think maybe a good place for us to kind of start the conversation is if you could share with us a little bit more about what kind of inspired you to get into digital health to begin with.
Digital health has been a big portion of my life for a very long time, and I think a lot of folks have heard this from other children of immigrants and very large families, is just trying to manage a lot of care for a very large extended set of relatives. And, we're lucky enough in the Bay Area with institutions like Kaiser and others who have been at that forefront of trying to transform that patient experience into a digital mode. So I think I just have always felt like there's something in that digital experience that could potentially be tweaked. And so I think the path I took in both my educational background as well as my overall career kind of combined a lot of those interests that I had in both technology and also in health policy, and happy to share a little bit more about that. But I just remember my earliest memory was really just trying to navigate and figure out all of the appointment scheduling for my family. And it's just, it's one of those funny things that you look back on, and never really quite figured out, exactly what's the most optimal experience. But I think a lot of the folks who have joined us today are still thinking about it. And I have found that digital health is probably the most fascinating sort of intersection for me, where I've been able to work with technology players in the past as a former strategy consultant and help them think about healthcare and innovation, and then to work with healthcare entities to figure out what their technology partnerships might look like. And then now I'm kind of back on the other end again. So it's been fun to kind of see it full circle over the last almost 20 years.
Wow, that is incredible. Yeah, and you're kind of when you were talking about your experience with just seeing how digital health can work on a patient side, especially with something like all of the administrative tasks and scheduling, I definitely know what you mean when it comes to that experience. You had mentioned a little bit about how some of your educational pursuits and that background has really kind of shaped your career and kind of what you were looking for. Can you share a little bit more about that?
I originally went to Stanford for my undergraduate work and thought, well, engineering makes sense. I've always found a lot of joy in that type of innovation. And then I started taking a lot of health policy classes, just, following a lot of the advice of different professors, and found the sort of the principles you could take from a math and science standpoint. You could take those into health outcomes research as well, and never really understood what that meant before. But it was just really lucky to work with a lot of those faculty. I ended up taking a research position as well with a professor who has published recently on going on offense around how companies can reinvent and take innovation into their hands over and over again. So I think just knowing that I had access to both health policy classes and all of this tech innovation coursework and in one institution kind of made me think, oh, I should probably customize my management science and engineering major a little bit more to follow along with what I think, can impact my family, my community, and hopefully, more broadly globally as well. And just had really fortunate circumstances to take advantage of a lot of the global health options that were available at Stanford. And so I would lead different communities and my classmates on to different global health trips along the way, and found all of that combination of, hey, you can take all of this coursework, you can do all of this research, and you can actually go with your classmates and really implement them, and even in a volunteer setting, I thought was just really unique and special for me. And so I found the sort of the combination of that to exist also in the consulting world. So I got my start in innovation consulting in 2007, and loved working on, okay, here are all the ways you can take designers and engineers and business folks kind of all in the same room, and to take that interdisciplinary process all the way through, and found the health and wellness challenges to be the ones out of all of the different industries to just be kind of the most intractable and so probably the most appealing at the time. And then once I was in consulting for a little while, my firm at the time, Monitor Deloitte, sponsored me to go to business school, as a lot of, I think, different consulting firms will do, and was just really lucky to take the healthcare management program coursework over at Wharton and meet a lot of other HCM alumni at the same time who were all embarking and starting their own companies and thinking about their own ventures. And so it was really just that exposure during business school that kind of took me a little bit outside of that Fortune 500 view, and then
Mhm.
started showing me, okay, this is what it looks like when you're at a 10-person company. This is what it looks like when you're trying to take a 200-person company and quadruple that. So I had a little bit of a chance to work on a lot of the real world evidence initiatives at the time at an EMR startup, and to kind of think about, okay, well, if we have new technologies like Google Glass and augmented reality, what does that mean for clinicians? So I was able to work with a startup on that whole growth, to help raise their Series A. And I think that startup bug was just something that I thought was really uniquely helpful for me as someone who thought about innovation in much bigger companies. But how do you kind of take some of that learning and bring it back to, well, eventually, with the sponsorship, you go back to your to your sponsoring firm. So I went back into consulting again, and at Monitor Deloitte, and started building out a bit more of that digital health practice at the firm, which was just really fun to see that evolve over about 10 years or so. So I think having those bookends of the engineering experience and the MBA was just really helpful in how I thought about digital health.
That is incredible. And I can only imagine how enlightening it must be because you're kind of, to your point, being able to see it kind of in theory through all of your coursework, but also being able to put it into practice with all of the other applications that you've kind of had from. It seems like you went on some really interesting like global trips to kind of get a lot of perspective and just working at all of these different types of companies. So you definitely, it seems like you got such a great lens on digital health from all of these different angles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my experience at in graduate school was also one of the top reasons I realized, okay, I think at a certain point in time, and I think this is about close to 6 or 6.5 years ago, it was time for me to think about the next journey, and the opportunity popped up to join the leadership team over at Honor, which is the largest senior care platform now. But back then it was a smaller Series B type of startup, and so I was able to take on the new market strategy function, and eventually also be the head of BD for Honor. And so found that experience to be really powerful to help shape my understanding of what does it mean to take ML and AI and really apply it at scale for some national and some international kind of expansion initiatives. And that also took me into a similar role at Lyra Health, where I was able to head up the new product solutions team, and bring a similar kind of path of, okay, you're a national digital health company. How do you go from national to international? Lots of different options along that way. And so that's ultimately what led me to a very similar type of role at Samsung, where I am as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, it seems like there's so many great opportunities where you've been able to really get different perspectives. And I'm also so curious because you've touched on this a lot, kind of just around your own personal experiences. Are there any that kind of come to mind that have really shaped your perspective of digital health? And I think healthcare innovation more broadly, as you just kind of like continued your educational pursuits and really started like in the workforce, seeing it with your own eyes.
Yeah, I think the personal experiences were just really, trying to dive into, okay, I think my family member has this one, major issue. It's going to require a lot of digging in and understanding, okay, how do they ultimately navigate all of these different specialties? And it gets so overwhelming. And
Definitely.
it's one of those instances where sometimes when you have access to Dr. Google, it can be a double-edged sword, and trying to help folks understand and sift through, okay, yes, you found that on the internet, but maybe that's not exactly what your physician meant at the time, and then just trying to help folks kind of parse through that information was something that left an impression on me as someone trying to help families, manage their care and manage what their journey looked like. But I think on the professional setting, a lot of the work, the experience I was trying to push forward was on the provider side, and I realized that a lot of for whatever reason, I think most of my closest friends from undergraduate are now physicians, and I just always would hear about the amount of burnout they were dealing with at work, and how stressful that was for them and their families, and how it would impact some of their patient care as well. And I think just knowing, the personal impact that that would have in that provider experience was what really drove a lot of my, okay, let's try to bring the interdisciplinary experts together and, try and collaborate across industries and across companies and try and improve these experiences, not just for the patient and their families, because that's a huge circle of folks, but, also for the clinicians in the front line who are on the ground and, trying to do their best with the kinds of systems and resources that they have. And so I think no matter how challenging the professional moments would get, and I know you have those moments all the time, it was always just this reminder to me, okay, I get that this can be a little bit difficult right now, but it's kind of nothing compared to, what we see our frontline colleagues doing. And I just have the utmost respect for what clinicians are handling with day in, day out, just because of kind of my own personal experience there.
Wholeheartedly. Yeah. Could not agree more, and very well said, Kelly. And I think it just goes to show that it seems like you're just getting so much inspiration and motivation from kind of the world around you and really seeing it being put into use. And I'm just so curious because you've kind of been in this space and have built just a wealth of experience in, a continuously changing environment that is digital health. Really curious, are there any things that you do to just kind of stay informed on what's happening and kind of allow you to really chart a path forward as there just continues to be policy changes, innovations, all of these things kind of continuously in flux?
Gosh, I'm so glad you mentioned policy changes, because I was just speaking at the Wilson Sonsini conference on digital health. Our topic was on AI in digital health, but most of our topics were really around the big overarching policy changes coming down the pike, because I know a lot of us have been thinking about, how do you harness the power of AI and ML in healthcare for, 15 or 20 years, but the big question is, what are we potentially, as consumers, what are we potentially giving up in terms of privacy, or, what might eventually kind of help consumers understand how to take control, over the overall experience. And I think there are more and more sort of trends toward regulations that emphasize that sense of control, and being able to take charge of your own destiny with what happens to your data. So I think just trying to stay on top of, joining the HIT Lab events and the symposia are incredibly helpful for me as a digital health professional. And I think what you do every week in, week out is incredibly useful as well, because it's such an overwhelming amount of change. But at the same time, I also think that in terms of staying on top of it and meeting with a lot of different funders and founders, and just being able to take advantage of the ecosystem, both regionally on the West Coast, but also a lot of the events kind of throughout the US are just really incredibly helpful to track those trends. But at the same time, even as I think about tracking them, I think we all have a little bit of that responsibility to figure out, well, what can we do to help influence? And we all have representatives and different sort of local forums, or national as another example, and to think about, okay, if there are certain things that don't quite fit, the experience that we need it to be for our families or for ourselves today as patients, what is it that we can actually do to try and make the advocate for those changes? So just a little bit more on the personal side as well. But I have to admit, I think yeah, it is challenging, but I really welcome that these types of formats have a lot of folks who are engaging. They can engage in the chat and engage afterwards as well, and help everyone kind of get up to speed on the latest and greatest.
100%. It is one of those things where community really can not only just bring people together, but also, to your point, really inform and kind of keep everyone up to date. because you are bringing together a collective of so many different perspectives. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for sharing that, Kelly. Awesome. I now kind of wanted to ask a little bit more about your current role, knowing that you've been so entrenched in so many different aspects of digital health, from consultancy to kind of working with startups, etc. What kind of attracted you to this role to join Samsung, and how has your journey been so far?
Yeah, so far it's been fantastic. So it's a very unique team where we're looking at a lot of the build by partner decisions across the broader digital health landscape. It's really a US team who's thinking a lot about the ability to enable the digital health founders who are trying to make a big difference in their spaces. And the really interesting thing is both at the last the Wilson conference I was referencing, and even just thinking back to Rock Health Summit from last year, women's health has just become a bigger and bigger push. And so I think just naturally when we were talking about, hey, let's build a US digital health team within Samsung, it inevitably means we're also thinking about, well, what does it really mean to think about women's health at Samsung more broadly? So it's been fun to take that innovation and entrepreneurship mindset where a lot of us were coming externally from different startups and from different healthcare companies and trying to infuse a lot of that sort of startup innovation mindset and bring it into more of a wearables type of environment. A type of the team had previously worked with you all at Kaiser to figure out remote patient monitoring in a really meaningful way for a lot of different cardiac populations. And so I think trying to come in and think about, well, what's that next step to commercialize and enable the next generation of digital health broadly has been a really fun challenge. That I know a lot of analogies will sort of use the word platform over and over again, but I have to go back to that platform analogy of,
Do it.
can we build something that helps support and then lift up the digital health entrepreneurs who are out there and all of the folks who are in the ecosystem? And I think we can, because we've focused so much on offering a lot of different kinds of technology resources, financial resources, different kinds of ways to help folks grow their digital health populations and the impact that they can make in their spaces, and including in women's health. And it's not just on the wearable side, although I am personally very excited about our smart ring launch. Just knowing that it just makes such a huge impact. Both the watch and the ring are really great form factors to help folks track and understand sleep and a wide variety of other biomarkers that impact the sort of individual conditions on a day-to-day basis. I think that's going to be really, really exciting. So our team has been looking at all of the different kinds of opportunities to support founders. It is now much larger as well. So we've been able to cover a wide variety of therapeutic areas and conditions. But I think the underlying thought process is when so much care is moving into the home, and about 70% of US households are a Samsung household, how do we help those folks who, ostensibly are probably managing their family's healthcare and kind of the overall sort of perspective on the longitudinal journey. And so as we launch a longitudinal health record for folks, we're excited to help everyone kind of navigate what that care might be, and it kind of ties back to my own personal interest on how do you actually make that experience a little bit better for some of us family caregivers. And then the fun piece too is we've seen a lot of folks really provide a lot of that positive feedback around medication tracking as another example of how do you help folks kind of take a sort of a bigger role in managing their next step in their care journeys, and so that's going to be a really fun focus area for us over the next year or two, and we can't do it alone. We're always looking for digital health partners, and we've had some really fun announcements recently with Bayer and Bioformis and other companies that have been helping to support the digital health growth as well. And we're just very excited to to continue that conversation with other digital health players too.
That's incredible. And I could imagine, I mean, you are in a role that's so expansive in terms of what you're covering and obviously so incredibly impactful. How do you approach this is maybe a loaded question, but I'm so curious. How do you approach like problem solving and decision making in this type of a role? Like, do you have a specific methodology that you use as you're really kind of analyzing all of these opportunities, really looking to the future and kind of setting that foundation?
Yeah, this is such a great question. It makes me think back to some of the different technology innovation classes and coursework from my undergraduate studies, because the question is always, if you're going to commercialize something, if you want to ensure that innovation has an ultimate landing spot, what kind of impact are you hoping to see, and how do you measure that? And I think that just one of the simplest frameworks that a professor shared a long time ago was something that I just ended up bringing into my professional career as well, which was really is something, very much a feasible type of opportunity where you have enough of the technology changes, and the resources and the tools at hand to really
Mhm.
implement that. And I think that feasibility is incredibly important. Just it is a little bit of that engineering mindset that I try to bring to problem solving. But I would be remiss if we don't talk about the consumer perspective, where, is something really desirable from the user standpoint, whether it's the end patient or if it's an end clinician user, is it really actually tackling one of their unmet needs? And I think the easiest way to figure that out is just to follow them around and
Mhm.
really understand what their day-to-day looks like. And so if you kind of combine that desirability and that feasibility together, you have something pretty powerful already. But then the big question, especially in Silicon Valley, is always how do you scale something like that? And if you want to reach scale, if you want to have that longevity for a particular innovation, then you always have to ask this question around viability. And if you see that kind of viable path in the future, whether it's around market access with different kinds of reimbursement structures, whether it's a specific kind of direct consumer cash pay type of model is so common in the US and other countries as well. But if you kind of combine all three of those elements together to really try and break a problem apart, I think it's helpful to review it and with all of of course, your many interdisciplinary collaborators who have deep perspectives on each of those three. And if you can find that one that one sort of mode in the middle that of all three that can take you forward, it's helpful to start with that minimum viable product and then to build on top of it and tweak one of those three moving forward. And I think where you are at Kaiser, there's so many folks who are innovators who have shown that if you take those three, then they were able to scale something really quickly. And we always look externally to good examples like that to make sure we're thinking about things correctly.
I love that. And I love that it's a framework that you studied. I think it's always great when you can pull from those moments too. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Kelly. I do want to get to a question that we have that I think is really interesting because it does kind of speak to some of the consumer components that you were talking about. But the question is, and I'll read it. There are a lot of developments in the field of AI in healthcare, but one of the existing problems is the data used to train systems is still not diverse enough, especially when it comes to data representing minorities. Do you think this problem will be solved anytime soon? If yes, how? And I really like this question because I think it just speaks to equity, pretty just more broadly in a healthcare landscape.
Yeah, that's such a fantastic question, because I think I'm sure you talk about this week in, week out, where we know that women weren't even in clinical trials until the 90s. That is much too recent, and it's kind of mind blowing there. But I think there's just an interesting question around, now that we have access to more and more of the data that comes from the home, where most of us are spending our time anyway. We're not necessarily in healthcare settings. I think that opens up a much bigger door for us to think about matching our data back to a more representative population. Because if you look at just the classic health systems out there, they're not going to be representative of the US population. We know this. There's so much, so much work already to try and ameliorate that. But I think the care at home aspect is opening up the set of data that we can pull from folks in really easy ways. I know it's not going to be instant. It may take many more years before we really understand how to access all of the communities that really need to contribute to health research and to help us make advances and overall health equity. But I think now that there's much more data and there's much more smartphone penetration into most
Mm,
households, that's actually something we thought a lot about at Honor, because our primary product was really aimed at that mobile experience for that professional caregiver. And that professional caregiver is most commonly coming from underserved communities and communities that normally wouldn't have access potentially to a smartphone. So we'd always have to work with them on, okay, this may be the first time you're holding a smartphone, but these are all the experiences we're trying to design around your work. How do we make this better? And I think having those conversations, really doing the work and actually getting into the day in the life was just incredibly important for us. So I think if more and more companies are thinking about that experience, and that was almost a full decade ago. So we've made strides there, but as we see that penetration of technology go into the home of all different kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds and different kinds of communities, I do think that we can start to pull a lot of that data. And we've even seen the regulatory pushes too, right? So now we're really just seeing so many of these clinical trials recruit from the populations that have been completely overlooked in the past. I think a lot of the newer, more sort of tech-enabled CROs are doing a really great job in that realm. I know Walgreens and other companies have also thought about, how do you kind of position yourself in areas where you may be the only kind of touch point for folks with the broader system. And those folks they'll never step foot into a hospital unless they have to go to the ER. But how do you kind of ensure that their data and their voices and their participation is really brought into the fold? And I just think that's so incredibly challenging, but also one of the most important things that we can all work on today.
absolutely. And I think you just painted, such an incredible opportunity for just continued design and innovation, kind of really building a system that serves everyone. So I don't know, I was very inspired by what you were saying. Thank you so much, Kelly. I just realized that we're at time, which
Oh
is
my goodness.
crazy to me. We definitely need to have you over for a part two because I feel like there's so many more questions I could ask you, but I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
Likewise, Nina.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Make sure you join us next week for our next session. Wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsors for sponsoring this conversation, as well as to our guest, Kelly, for such an enlightening discussion. And we will see you all next Wednesday. Bye, everyone.